Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Welcome. This is the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Your host, Joey, the Italian Stallion Murray, joined as always by Russ, the idea guy Morgan. So you ask us, how do people use this infinite banking concept? Give me some real examples, some practical things, because I need ideas. Well, today we have an awesome example of somebody who took action with their infinite banking policies and turned it into freedom from their job. What are your thoughts on this interview, Russ?
How about really quickly, J-O-B? You ever heard of that?
I have heard of that. Yeah.
You know, people always say, you got to go to your J-O-B. I was listening to this book the other day, and he said, J-O-B, just about broke.
Okay, that's an A.
Oh, I'm sorry.
About is not an O.
I messed that up. Just over broke. That's what it was. Just over broke.
That sounds better.
I think just about sounds better, even though it'd be jab.
Yeah. I think, no, that doesn't fit.
No. Either way, the concept matters because Noah Boren, who we interviewed today, who is a listener to the show, a client of Wealth Without Wall Street, who has done a great job of taking action, right? Listening and then applying. And Joey, I don't know anybody in the world who's created a better accountability for themselves than Noah.
Exactly. I mean, what you're going to hear in the interview is he started his own podcast called When Can I Quit My Job?
And if you listen to the podcast, it's When Can I Quit My Soul Crushing Job?
Exactly. So, I mean, if you're even thinking about going back, like taking the boats back to the mainland or something like that, if you start a podcast like that, you're done.
No, that is burning the bridge, literally. Burning the boats, burning bridges.
And yeah, so this guy was serious. He put it out there. He had his vision, almost his virtual vision board by having that podcast out there every week to produce. And he made it. So that's a spoiler alert. Right?
Yeah. Well, he's now successfully unemployed, taking a plug from one of our future podcast guests that we have, who's created a business. I really am so excited for him and his wife. They have worked really hard to get to the point to where their income is greater than their expenses, coming from assets, not from him actually trading time for money. And I'm just excited for you to hear it, because this is a postal worker. This is somebody who was driving in a car and decided to take the time that was given to him to listen to podcasts, listen to books, put that information into action. He got a master's degree, a PhD in actual Finance 101 from listening to it. And I can tell you could take some points out of this interview and apply it to yourself. So let's jump into our interview with Noah Boren.
If you've been listening to our show for a while and you've heard the Stallion and I talk about how we use these life insurance policies to invest in our business, to buy real estate, and to do numerous other things, and you're like, look, I want to do that. That's what I want to have, but I don't have one of these policies. It's so stinking easy. Just go into the show notes, press the button to schedule a call with us. Somebody on our team can walk you through that process. Or go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com, click the schedule call now.
Welcome into the show. We have Noah Boren on the show today. Man, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys.
So Noah, take us back to early February, and you've requested to go to this conference, this like life-changing conferent.
Right.
And you're a week out. You've put in the request, and you get notice from your employer that you can't go. What's going through your mind? Tell me about what happened.
Right. Oh, geez. I'm almost 40 years old, and just, thinking to myself, I'm at this job, which the job itself, being a mailman,
this is the best job I've had. But, just thinking to myself, this is where I am. I'm 40 years old. And I gave these guys 6-week notice, and they can't find one guy to cover one shift. And, my wife and I have a lot of plans for our future, and this was a part of it, finding new people to network with. And it was too important to us. So I think maybe they saw it coming, maybe they didn't, because they definitely pulled me aside and said, if you miss tomorrow, you're gonna have to bring me a doctor's note. So I got together with my friends and family because I was angry. I was looking forward to the conference, and hopefully this was going to be a changing part of our lives. And we decided, well, they asked for the doctor's note, so that's what we'll give them. So I went to the Ready Med, and I coughed a couple times, and I got a little slip of paper to give them, and we went anyway. And for the better. So we got to meet some great people who I still network with and I'm still talking to about possible future ventures, and no regrets. That I'm pretty sure I was hated by all my coworkers for the next couple of weeks because they knew what exactly went down. But I got to look out for my family at home, not my family at work, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So did they know what went down because you had told them, or because you had a job that says, when can I quit my job? You have a podcast that kind of, that had already kind of said, this is what I want to do. All of these things may have been like small clues, right? It didn't require a whole lot of detective work to figure out what Noah was up to, I'm assuming. Yeah,
I think they could have followed the breadcrumbs if they wanted to, but no, at that point, the podcast was a little hush-hush at work for obvious reasons, but that wasn't the customer base I was trying to build at the time.
So I have two questions along the lines of that, Noah. So number one, I can't think of anybody who is gainfully employed that could start a podcast called "When Can I Quit My Job" and continue employment. Like, Russ, can you imagine Ernie coming to us or we finding out that Ernie started a podcast that says, "When Can I Quit My Job?" That would be a really short-lived podcast. It would be one episode. I'd be like, hey, Ernie, by the way, I want to answer the question. It's today. Like, you can quit your job today because you're done. Okay. So how does that?
But obviously, people have like goal boards. They have vision boards. The concept of writing it down. For a while, Joey and I, we were trying to lose weight, so we were writing it on this like little makeshift chalkboard inside of our kitchen. Helping us avoid going in there for the extra snack. People like to put goals in front of them, but that's another level of accountability when you create a podcast that's on the subject matter.
Well, yeah, you got to keep yourself accountable one way or another. And if it's recording, 32 ways, how do I lose my job? I guess that's how you got to do it. But at the time, it wasn't public knowledge. Well, in my office anyway, I was telling everybody else that I could about it. But I didn't tell any of my coworkers about the podcast. But through the podcasts I was listening to, and the community of people that I had networked with who were going for this, passive income model or cash flowing at least. That's really what everybody wants to do. That's the gist I got out of it.
Well, let me ask you, let me kind of dive into that for a second, Noah. So you say everybody wants this, and I don't disagree. I think there's a lot of people that are in that same boat. But for you, what were those things along the path? You're at the job. You've even mentioned this was the best job I've had, right? Because you've had a lot of other jobs and they weren't as strong. But you're in the job that you said is the best job I've ever had. And yet you still start a podcast to say, when can I quit my job? So there's passion, there's desire, something behind that. What were some of those things? Just kind of explain to us some of those things that would drive you to that. Thanks.
So my background is more in sales, and that was micromanagement was always what I hated. I always hated, I'm okay with having metrics and things to measure success by, but having a daily call about why I'm missing a metric by 2 or something, micromanagement I always detested. And I got away from that at working at the post office, which is why I loved it so much, because you're very autonomous. But still, being called in. My manager told me when I worked at the post office, she said, you don't have to come in if we call you on your day off. We'll just stop scheduling you days off. That was their solution. They said, we'll schedule you for a day off, but you have to answer your phone if we call, and you have to come in. If you don't answer your phone call, then you just won't be scheduled any more days off.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, you have, I get it. Joey and I obviously quit our jobs a long time ago to create our own business. And that was the same sort of thing we had. I mean, you just kind of described a famous scene from Office Space where, it's Saturday and he's getting the call at home. It's not a half day or anything, right? They're scheduling you for days that you think you're going to be off, but yet they want you there. So I totally get that. That's a total common thing for us. So as you're at this point, you created obviously a podcast, as you describe on the podcast, quitting a soul crushing job, and now you've started learning, you started listening to podcasts. So talk a little bit about, because you've learned some really interesting things through podcasts. Talk about a couple of the things that kind of led you on this path.
I was listening to the Tom Woods show, and he had a cash flow investor on. His name is Hunter S. Thompson, which is kind of confusing because it's not the writer. But he has his own podcast about cash flow investing. And that day, I think it was early 2000, I don't know, must have been 15. That was the first time I ever heard the phrase cash flow investing. And it sent me down 100 rabbit holes. And through just education, through different podcasts and audiobooks, I determined that I wanted to invest in a real asset instead of the market, because you have no control over the market. And, on a good year, you can make 10%, but of course those numbers are fudged anyway. So I determined that I wanted to invest in a real asset, and real estate was the best way to go. It's, the lone place of self-made millionaires, basically, that's left. And I did a lot of research, and I wanted something that was recession resistant. And so that led me down a couple different rabbit holes as well. I looked into storage facilities. I looked into mobile home parks, and I looked into actually retirement homes, because the boomers are getting ready to start filling those up. And when I was listening to a podcast by Kevin Bupp about mobile home park investing is when I heard Mark Podolsky, and he started talking about investing in land, which seemed perfect to me, because after doing the research, I realized of all the places I was looking, it was the one area of real estate investing that I could get into that didn't have the two barriers of entry I saw in all the other places, which is either you had to have extreme knowledge and expertise to get in there, or you had to have a bunch of capital to get in there. And for me, the land investing didn't have either of those two barriers, because I still feel like I barely know what I'm doing. And I started with, we started with $16,000. So not a lot to most people. And that was enough to get going. And, we've been doing that for a year and a half, and that's how we got where we are now. Our banks aren't our bank accounts aren't overflowing yet, but we're paying the bills, and I'm doing it without a job.
You have a lot more time freedom, at least, right? Not the job.
Absolutely.
But, okay.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. So I still work in my business quite a bit. But 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, because there's a saturation point. The only way for me to make money at this is through advertising. And I do most of my advertising on Facebook, and you can only have so many ads up there. So I can reach a saturation point with my ads where I don't have anything else that I can do that day. And, I'm okay with that.
So Noah, you're listening to lots of podcasts. You hear a podcast on, on a podcast, or you hear a guy who has a podcast on a podcast, which is Mark Podolsky, the land flipping, and that you get really excited about that because there's a low barrier of entry, as you mentioned, that something that you don't have to have lots of money and lots of experience to get into.
Right.
And so you come home, you share this with your wife, and you say, I have the $1 million idea, or I have the path to getting out of our jobs and being able to quit. What was her reaction when you started telling her about this stuff?
that wasn't the exact conversation. I don't know if I'd have gotten the buy-in at that point for that, but well, we've been looking at houses together here in. I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We've been, actually walking into houses, checking them out because we were going to buy some to rent out. So she knew that I was on this real estate path, and I found this thing. And at the time, the toolkit, which is basically all the forms and legal documents and strategies that you need at that point, was maybe $1,500 or something like that. And before I brought it to her with, this is what's going to change our life, I did quite a bit of research on it. And it was more like, let's hold off on, buying a house and renting it out. Because I had done projections for things like that, and it was, 7 to 10 years probably before it could come close to replacing my income. And, I'm impatient. So, I saw some opportunity here that it could be a quicker turnaround. And so when I brought it to her, it was more like, look, there's a lot of opportunity here. I don't know exactly what it is or what it could be, but I think it could be great. It's a lot less risky to enter. I don't have to worry about as much. I don't have to worry about the volatility of the market. Because when we were looking at real estate, it still continued to rise since then, but I was already fearful of a downturn. And so, I kind of proposed this to her as a lot less risk with a lot potentially higher upside, quicker turnaround time between starting it and seeing success with it. And if I give her a strong explanation, and she's always game. She's always on my team, and she's always willing to go down even risky paths with me as long as she can tell I believe in it. I'm going to follow through with it, and that there's potential there for it to make our lives better. So,
what would you say was her experience of you being in a job that you would say is soul crushing? Like up to that point, I mean, what was how would she have thought about that?
I think she hated my job more than she hated her job.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, she just felt it for me, because anytime I had to go into work or like, I got called in on my day off and things like that, and I was, upset. She was more mad than I was. So it was a drag on both of us. And like I said, that was my best job ever. So what does that tell you about my experience with jobs in general? So yeah.
She was anxious for you to find a way out.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
And then I jumped the gun even earlier than I thought I was going to when I quit my job. I quit at the end of May. My initial goal was, I mentioned, so we went on a cruise this year to Alaska. My initial goal was to quit that weekend when we went. But then, the more I thought about it, if I truly believe the things I'm saying to my friends and family about the success of this business, and that compiled with me just thinking about it logically, that if, basically if I can get an additional 1.5 sales a month, then that's my income. So if I can make 2 more sales a month by not being at my job, then it doesn't make sense for me to stay at my job.
Well, at some point you have to compare the costs, right?
Exactly.
So there's
opportunity cost was more than I was getting paid.
The opportunity of being at your work is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah. The opportunity of being able to sell a couple more pieces of land, that was costing me more than I was getting paid.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's press pause a little bit, because there's some people that may be coming in this conversation fresh and have never heard anything about this whole land flipping, which we've obviously interviewed Mark Podolsky on our podcast. We've actually had him on twice now. He's in our community. He's done a Q&A. So it's something that if you have not had a chance to go back and have heard that, go back and listen to Flipping Land and the second edition we did to that, or join the community and watch the live Q&A that we did. So for people who don't know much about land flipping, give real quick, how you experienced that and how you and your wife have started implementing that in your lives.
So you pick a county, and then basically you determine what you think the retail value of land is there, and then you just mail offers to the owners of that property for a percentage of that, typically about 25% of what you think you could sell it for. that's it. And you're going to get a lot of angry phone calls, and you'll get some people that say, okay, I've never seen that piece of land. My dad gave it to me when he died. Sure. And then you'll buy it, and then you just market it on places like Facebook and Craigslist. You get a lot closer to retail. I see returns, anywhere from 100% to 600%. And typically, right now, I don't sell as fast as the people who are seasoned vets in this do, but I typically sell within 2 months or something. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, so Noah, so somebody's listening to this and they say, that sounds like a really interesting process. Obviously, there's an education to that, but there's also the funding aspect. And you talk about you only did this with starting with like $16,000. Do people normally fund this through like an equity line, or like what funding vehicles did you use to get started?
So for us, we were divesting from the market anyway. And I don't ever suggest to another person to just do that without, talking to someone who knows more about it. But that's kind of what we were doing anyway. We were getting out of our IRAs and things like that. We had some cash on hand. We sold our house. So we had a couple of windfalls that we were able to use. So we started with that 16,000, but there are ways you can start with zero money. It's a little more involved, or you can talk to maybe a family member or someone in our community or whatever that might have money to invest with you. But it doesn't take a lot. You can start off by you can find parcels of land that'll sell for $400 and you can buy it for $100, You're not going to replace your income with that in 6 months, but it can grow pretty organically and pretty quickly that way. So I wouldn't say there's a typical way that people fund it. I can say I might be the only person on earth who uses IBC and land investing. And well, if I throw in that I also do profit first in there, then I'm probably pretty sure I'm the only person on earth who does that. But but I wouldn't say a lot of people fund it using their IBC like I do.
Yeah. So no, you're driving around town. You've already mentioned that you listen to lots of podcasts and lots of books as you're in the mail car or the long life vehicle, as you reference it. And you hear a podcast on land flipping that obviously piques your interest. You're like, man, this is something I need to get involved in. You hear another podcast and it starts talking about this concept of the infinite banking concept. Give me your first take of that. And we're what sort of, rabbit hole did that take you down?
Yeah. Well, at first when I heard it, I was like, wow, I can use this to retire when I get old and not get taxed on it. That was the first thing I was drawn to. I was drawn to the investment aspects of it, not realizing that it's more of a cash flow management system. So for a very long time, I was drawn to it for the wrong reasons, but maybe not the wrong reasons, but not realizing its full potential. So the longer I studied it and learned about it, I slowly opened my eyes to the potential of using it to fund a business, using it to fund, things like that in my own life, that I was like, wow, I read about this, but I didn't fully grasp it at first. And now my eyes are kind of open a little bit more to it and how it and the land business together can really feed into each other.
So that's not a bad thing, though. Hold on a second, Sally, real quickly. That's not a bad thing, though. We all get in our cars, and none of us know exactly how every working part moves and operates, right? But yet we get in there and we drive around all day long. Well, so for you understood a portion of how this concept worked, and it applied to what you were trying to do at that moment. But then, as you heard another podcast on land flipping, and you started going down that angle, is that where you said, wait a second, I can use this tool much better for this implementation?
Yeah, well, at the point when I started using IBC for our business, the main reason was because that's where most of our pool of wealth was. But just through doing it, there's more of the action that opened my eyes to what it was. So it wasn't me realizing the potential and then starting to do it. It was me doing it because that was our only option, and then realizing the potential thereafter.
Yeah. So let me, I kind of always equate this to infinite banking can sometimes be like you're at one end of a tunnel looking at the other end of the tunnel. And if you're that far away from it, you can only see so much. You can see like a really small perspective. But as you walk down the tunnel towards the other end, all of a sudden more is there. Like it just starts to open up. You can see more of the perspective of what was always there. You just were too far away from it to see it. So it sounds like as you've gotten closer to it, you're saying, whoa, this is a lot bigger than I thought. For somebody that is in your position or your previous position, they're in a job that they don't love. They need more time freedom. They want to not have somebody say, hey, by the way, your day off is my day. I'm just going to give it to you like, you think it's your day off.
Right.
Somebody that's in that position, knowing what you know now, how would you tell somebody to get started with this whole process of funding IBC and then getting into something like land flipping or otherwise?
Well, I think the first step is always education. Definitely, if I were to talk to someone about it, I would suggest your podcast. I would suggest the Laura Mercury Report. I would suggest Becoming Your Own Banker, the book. There's so many resources. But yeah, first step for me is always education and having somewhat of a grasp on it. But I also buy into almost the lifestyle of ready, fire, aim is a big thing that my wife and I talk about a lot and we focus on. I can't even think of who authors the book, but we kind of adopted that mentality before we ever even read the book. Equip yourself with enough knowledge, take the first step. But when you have that knowledge, take that first step. You can fix it as you go.
Yeah, well, you're referencing the Michael Masterson book, Ready, Fire, Aim, which is kind of really an entrepreneur's guide to just how to get started, right? And I have a friend of mine that says a quote, you don't have to be great to start, you just have to start to be great. And that's really, in anything that we do, there's a starting point and we're going to learn more as we're in it. And sometimes we learn that, hey, wait a second, this is not what we want to be in. And I think that's kind of where you were probably in your employee journey, right? You were looking for a better job. You got one and realized even the best job possible was not what you wanted. And that led you down a trail of learning. And it goes back to, Sally, what you and I talk about on the podcast all the time, is that our greatest asset is who?
Ourselves.
It's us. Yeah, it's ourselves. And the money that we invest in ourselves will become our greatest investment. And that's what you did. You and your wife started learning. Kudos to you for not only starting to listen into podcasts and audiobooks, but then investing and going to some of these conferences that you went into. I know you spent probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on some of this stuff when it revolves around the investments that you're focusing in on right now. So here's a question I have. So you had some of these challenges early on that you were talking about. Time freedom was a big issue. You didn't control what that looked like. You found infinite banking, which is a tool that's helping you implement this land flipping. So you're kind of on the other side of it, right? So you kind of reached your moment of leaving your job. You truly quit your job. You're looking back on it. What are some of those things that you would tell somebody else who is on the fence of stepping out and implementing some of these things that you've done? What are those kind of lessons learned that you could share with them that would be helpful?
Well, I think it is important that what you mentioned, I was going job to job and I found the best job ever. And you have to know if you are a person who wants a job. And I was 35 years old before I decided that I didn't want to have a job anymore. So, that's not always obvious to everybody. And, sometimes it takes a certain job to really prove that to you. But first off, knowing if you want a job or not. And that might involve some soul searching. But, if you have determined that you don't want a job, then there are so many avenues. All the people you guys talk to on here, all their different methods of earning cash flow, honestly, if you pick one of them, you can make it work. you don't have to find one that sings to your soul or anything like that, but one that you believe in enough to go through the motions to do it.
So let me ask you, how do you feel like using infinite banking is helping you now? Because there's people out there that listen to this podcast who were just like you one day that heard about this concept, started doing some research, but never took action because maybe they didn't think it actually worked, right? Maybe the old phrase, it seems too good to be true, must be false, right? It must not be true. So you clearly take the approach of like, let me dive in and figure out how deep the water is. So, but you've also been doing it too. You've actually been implementing this for how long now?
So we started our first IBC account in May of 2017. So, and I guess, I'm kind of new at it myself, but I kind of did what nobody tells you to do, which is I put money in there, started using it right away. Most people, build it up over 5 years and, they say, oh, at that point you'll be able to use it. I was like, I can't wait that long. I got money in there. I need to use it.
No, so you started using this about 2.5 years ago. And so now you're speaking to someone who hasn't done it at all, who's just been listening to it on the podcast. Maybe they've done some of their own research. Talk about ways that you've been able to implement this in your life and the, the results and the benefits you're starting to see from that.
Most of the benefits are really going to come down the road. Right now, though, I think just having the money to use is the number one, first and foremost thing. But that is, we don't have a business without that. So, it's only one aspect of it, but just having the money available, I can call in and say, I did this last week. I said, hey, I need a $5,000 loan. They said, you want it on the account we have for you? And I said, yep. And then I got it 2 days later. So, just the ability to have access to, my own money without penalty is huge because there's so many places you can put your money in prison that you don't have access to that. So, really right now, functionally, that's the one and the hugest benefit of going through IBC. And I think the additional benefits will just kind of build along the way.
So let me ask you how you're implementing several really interesting concepts together. You're using this whole infinite banking concept, the process of borrowing against cash value life insurance. This, as you referenced it in the past, is kind of where your wealth has been created initially. And now you're going out and you're doing land flipping. How do you see those two pairing together? Obviously, you're kind of still at the early phases, but how do you see those things pairing together and playing off each other going in the future?
The more we do it, the more I just think it's the perfect marriage. If I can take out a $2,500 loan and buy a piece of property and within 2 months sell it for $10,000, that's, enough to start a new policy. Repeat. That's it. That's all it is. That's the whole business, and that's the whole way we use our IBC. And if only thing I have to do is more. So I don't even have to do. Our goal for this year was 50 properties. It might be the same goal for next year. All we have to do is move up from buying $1,000 properties to buying $2,500 properties. And if we're making $7,500 a piece doing 50 deals, that'll be a lot more than my $46,000 I was going to make as a mailman.
So Noah, thank you for sharing your experience, by the way. This is really helpful for people to see the practical use of, again, we kind of started the conversation of saying we want time freedom. Here you have done it and you're in the process. You haven't arrived yet, right? Even to your point, we're stepping into this and you're just paying the bills, but you're getting to a point, talk to us about what does the future look like as you're able to step into these higher deals, and what's to come for you? What is that true end that you're headed towards?
Well, so with this business model, we can do it from anywhere in the world. So my wife likes her job, but I'm still in the process of helping convince her that she doesn't need it, and she does right now. But I'm hoping by the end of next year that she won't, and then then we'll have true freedom over our time and where we are as well. So really, that's the next big step for us in our personal lives. For the business, as I mentioned, so right now we've got 18 sales this year. So I set a pretty high mark for us to aim for 50. Might not hit that, but I'm still shooting for it. But as far as like next year, I could see setting that same goal, but like I said, taking that next step up instead of buying land for 1,000 and selling it for 4, maybe start looking to buy land for 2,000 or 3,000 and sell it for 10 or 12 and that kind of thing. And then, once that starts to happen, we slowly build our passive income along the way. I have, I think I have 7 notes right now, land contracts that bring me in about $600 a month. Not a lot, but it's a start. So that'll continue to grow. And, it's going to, like I said, it's going to feed back in. The IBC is going to feed into the land business, and the land business is going to feed into IBC, because once we have an extra pool of money built up, and that's going to be another account.
That's awesome. So it sounds like the future for you is more of what you have now. Is you have more time freedom than you did at the Postal Service. What you're looking for and where you're headed is more of that by increasing your passive income. And therefore, you'll even have geographic freedom. I'm gonna put words in your mouth, but being able to basically operate from wherever. I mean, that sounds like the ideal situation.
Absolutely. And on top of that, part of this business model is using virtual assistants and start working on the business and less in the business, and kind of pull myself out of that as well, so I don't have these grueling 20-hour weeks.
Well, Noah, I can't thank you enough for being willing to share your experience. I mean, not all these things are easy to probably talk about and to explain because it is a short show. But man, I'm grateful to you for being willing to, and then for diving into this and taking those steps that most people are on the sidelines, not willing to take. Hopefully you've encouraged them at this point. Now, for those that want to kind of find a way to connect with you outside of this, of course, we know that you're going to be in our community, willing and able, I'm putting words in your mouth again, to answer questions. And we'll even do a live Q&A with you. So those of you who are not in the community, go to community.wealthwithoutwallstreet.com. It is live and ready for you to join. So please go and do that. But Noah, if someone wanted to reach out to you other than that, what's another way that they can to meet with you?
Yeah, it's easy. It's just When Can I Quit My Job? It's a podcast. You can find it anywhere podcasts are. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just type in When Can I Quit My Job?
Seems simple enough.
Great method and message for those who definitely are looking for time freedom, and you've given them a path, and you guys are talking about what's going on, but also you've seen the end. You've seen kind of that next step. And on one of your podcasts, you referenced a great analogy, and we can end with this, is that you talked about the NFL draft. And when somebody is drafted, it seems like, man, they've reached this pinnacle point. And I'm sure you felt like that whenever in May when you quit your job. But at the same point, when somebody gets the draft, it's just the starting point, right? They really haven't reached their highest potential. The next steps to come will be those moments that they will look back on with the highest of regard. And we're looking forward to hearing what those are in your life. And if you're out there seeking financial freedom and time freedom, this is a path. You get to hear a story from someone who's been listening to the show just like you have and has implemented a process. And that's what we're all about. So Noah, thank you again for coming on the show and sharing, and look forward to seeing you in the community.
Hey, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Have you been listening to our podcast and wondering, am I the only person that knows about infinite banking? Or what about the 5 pillars of Wealth Without Wall Street? How can I learn more? Now is your chance. You can join the community that is learning this across the country.
Go to community.wealthwithoutwallstreet.com, where you can access Q&As with all our podcast guests and live group coaching with some of the top experts from across the nation. And yes, I'm throwing in the Stallion and I in that. Just go to community.wealthwithoutwallstreet.com and sign up.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.